Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. In today's video, we're going to discuss what happened at COTA and how that has completely shaken up the F1 fantasy meta. I don't think I've ever seen this many varied lineups circulating online in F1 fantasy spaces. So we have a lot of things to discuss for the Mexican Grand Prix. But before we do so, I just have to announce that this weekend, the deadline stream will not be a proper deadline stream as it is too late in the evening and I do have plans on Saturday evening that I cannot skip out on that I've had in the works for quite some time. So for that reason, the deadline stream will be a pre-deadline stream on Saturday afternoon. So Saturday afternoon European time, around the time where we usually have it during European races. It will be from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Central European time. So, Germany, Sweden, Italy. For UK, that would be from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern time, US, it would be 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So that is the time for the deadline stream this weekend. But of course, as always, if you can't watch it during that time, the live stream is always up and available after the live stream is done on my YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it as a deadline stream, you can still do so and watch it, 2 hours before the deadline on Saturday evening. So it will be on YouTube. It will also be live on Twitch. But I will also be live tonight after this goes live, after this video is up. If you're watching this right now, I will probably be live all Thursday, all Friday, playing Football Manager. The new Football Manager game is launching, the beta is launching today. So I will be playing that over on my Twitch channel. So link in the description below to my Twitch channel. And so if you're not going to be able to be there for the deadline stream, you can always pop in there and ask me F1 fantasy questions, and I'll be happy to answer them, even though I'm playing a different game. And we'll be watching FP1 and FP2 in the background while I play that game on Friday. So I don't have work on Friday, so I've all the time in the world, day off, can play as much Football Manager as I want, and of course discuss F1 fantasy with you guys. So even though there's no proper deadline stream this weekend, there's still going to be a lot of me going live both Thursday, Friday, and of course on Saturday. So you'll still have opportunities to ask me about your teams. With those announcements out of the way, let's go and discuss what happened in COTA and what my plans are for Mexico. COTA is once again a middle-of-the-road weekend for me. I dropped by about 300 positions, but based on how many people activated their chips, it could have been a lot worse. And also considering I caught 4 DNFs this week, the fact that my rank has not tumbled further means I did something right. But that's sort of been the story of my second half of the season. I've been in the top 5k for quite some time now. I've been in the top 3k, like between 3,000 and 4,000 for God knows how many weekends now, and I'm just juggling up and down the ranks by a couple of hundred every single week. This is probably my biggest drop in a while, but again, a lot of people played their chips this weekend and did so sub-optimally, I will add. So let's discuss what happened with my team first, and then discuss what happened like COTA as of all. So I had one thing that I wanted to get for COTA, and that was Max Verstappen. It was my tip of the week for my deadline stream. I needed to get Max Verstappen in. The switch that I discussed on my team selection video last week is ultimately almost what ended up happening, but I decided to also take a -10, and that -10 did not perform that well, I must add. But looking, from a decision-making perspective, I think it was fine, even though I did break one of my core rules. So I ended up taking 3 transfers. Piastri out for Max Verstappen. I took Red Bull Racing out for Mercedes. And I took Hadjar out for Alonso. And the Hadjar out for Alonso was the -10, and I could have just stuck with Hadjar. Alonso looked really like the increase in price. I wanted him in my team for that weekend. He looked really good. He qualified well in the sprint qualifying, which is what we were judging it on, and was just unfortunately caught in that accident in the sprint, meaning that -10 ended up being like a -26 kind of. But and obviously Alonso ended up dropping in price anyway. It's difficult. That happens, but ultimately it was a positive move, because looking at what I could have had if I hadn't done those sort of moves, it would have been way worse. I was heavily considering going for a Max Verstappen and Piastri lineup instead of Max Verstappen and George Russell lineup for this weekend, and using my 3X. And even though 3X users who put it on Max obviously gained a lot of points, because Max got a lot of points and have probably passed me now, the 2X on Piastri was definitely a failure. So I'm just hoping that when I play my 3X either in Brazil or in Qatar, that I can, avoid a DNF on any of my two drivers, and thus sort of climb back up and catch them again. Another unfortunate thing is that I sold Red Bull Racing, who scored a lot of points. It was just a really unfortunate weekend in terms of what I had to do to get Max in, because my most important thing, I had so many different lineups that I could have gone for, but I had to go back to basics. I can't make too many luxury transfers. What's my priority? And my priority was to get Max in on the 2X, and that was a correct call. That was a correct assessment. Like, my tip of the week was learn the Dutch national anthem, and he, bar one lap, almost grand slammed it. I'm happy with the decision making. If I'd had 0.5 million more, I would have had this exact same team, but I would have not had to take the -10, and I would have had Red Bull Racing instead of Mercedes, which obviously outscored them. So that's really unfortunate. I've sort of missed the mark on the second premium constructor these 2 weeks. I had Red Bull Racing last week in Singapore when Mercedes scored higher, and then now I had Mercedes when Red Bull Racing scored higher. I did not expect Yuki Tsunoda to pop in with that big of a monster haul, and I kind of needed him to do that in Singapore. And then Antonelli had a bad, not an awful result by any means. He ended up scoring 22 points, so matching George, but obviously had that incident with Sainz. So the weekend where I needed Antonelli to perform poorly in Singapore, he had a really good race, and Mercedes was the reason. Me not having the Mercedes constructor was the reason I didn't gain more in rank last week. And then now this week, after I sell Red Bull Racing to bring Max Verstappen in, it's just an unfortunate timing all around. The Sainz DNF doesn't really matter at all. Looking at the elite data on F1 Fantasy Tools, Sainz is the highest owned asset in the top 500. So him DNFing, like, everyone had Sainz. Same with the McLaren constructor. Literally everyone in the top 500 had the McLaren constructor. So having a double DNF on them also doesn't matter. I was actually happy that the McLaren DNF, both for the championship fight, but also because a lot of people, I needed Piastri to perform poorly, right? Piastri was the biggest asset that I did not own this week, and a lot of people had him on the 2X, either with the 3X on Max, 2X on Piastri, or just blatantly on the 2X with something else, and obviously he did not have a great result this week. So, Bortoleto, fantastic. A lot of people were asking me, why are you selling Hadjar to Alonso instead of Bortoleto? Because Bortoleto started last in the sprint, and boom, 17 points. You never sell someone starting last. That is the if you have a driver starting P20 after the sprint quali, that is the driver you keep no matter how badly you want to sell them, okay? There's no reason to sell them if they're starting last, because that can happen. And most of his points, he has some overtakes, but had some positions lost in the main race. So I think he got 5 points in the main race. Most of his haul came from the sprint alone, but obviously the sprint was a bit chaotic. A lot of DNFs in that one, so there will be heavier or larger scores than usual for those cheap assets starting from the back. George Russell, a bit disappointed. I mean, mainly it's that Ferrari kind of showed up out of nowhere. They looked absolutely nowhere in the sprint qualifying, and then suddenly they were competing for podiums. I was hoping George Russell, as a Ferrari fan, I'm delighted. But as an F1 fantasy player, I was sort of certain that George Russell felt like the 4th place finisher, and he just wasn't that this week. So, Charles Leclerc was definitely the one to pick, but I don't think, almost no one had him in the top 500. They were very, very low owned. So a crazy week all around, and I haven't even discussed all the big scores that happened this weekend. Let's jump over to tinkering with my team and see what I can do with 2 free transfers in Mexico and beyond. This is going to be a longer video because I'm about to do something that I haven't done in a very long time. I'm actually going to go through every single asset in the game and talk about how I think they fit in, because in terms of my team, I can't do that much with 2 free transfers. But if you have your wild card, I truly think there has never been more viable options in the game ever. Which is crazy. Like the amount of combinations now is truly endless. And the main reason for that is that this thing doesn't seem to be mandatory anymore. McLaren are on a downward spiral of form and on a downward spiral of mentality. Max is chasing them. Mistakes will be made. They have in the last 3 not performed that well. 64 points in Singapore is obviously still really good, and that's sort of what we have come to expect from them over the course of the season. But as you can see, apart from in Canada, they've really not had a score this low in such quick succession. 6 points in Azerbaijan, 22 points at Kota. Sprint weekend, obviously double DNF, which, is the thing that really hurts here. But because this massive chunk of budget is not automatically just removed from your team, you have way more options. Now, with that being said, if you don't have a wild card, I think you're kind of crazy to sell McLaren. And the reason for that is that I think you require so many transfers to build the optimal team without McLaren. I just don't really see it. Granted, I will show you an option later for my team where I do sell McLaren. But I think one of the main strengths of selling McLaren is that you can divvy up the funds elsewhere and have assets such as Kimi Antonelli, Yuki Tsunoda, etc. I think all of these strategies that doesn't involve the McLaren constructors should still be considered off meta. I think the McLaren constructor has been way too consistent throughout the season for us to ignore it based on a double DNF in Kota. Because if they had not had that double DNF, they would have been on quite a haul of points. Because it's not just plus 40 we're talking about here, because obviously their drivers would have finished in the points. So we're actually talking closer to maybe 60 points, 55 to 60 points swing on top of this 22. So they would have been on a 70 to 80 point score this weekend without that double DNF, which, was very unlucky, you must say, right? You can, I think Piastri was in the fault there, but it was still unlucky that both cars gets taken out by it. And if that had not happened, we would not be having this conversation right now. So I do think, there is like a DNF risk that I think has increased with McLaren, with both of their drivers now looking a bit more shaky. I think Norris is in better form and looks better mentally now. It's mainly just that Piastri has begun to falter for the first time in the season, and he actually appears human, which he didn't earlier in the season. He very much felt like a Kimi Räikkönen, Max Verstappen. It looked like nothing could face him. Now he seems actually faced by the possibility of becoming drivers' champion, and he's making some mistakes. If that double DNF doesn't happen, we're not discussing selling McLaren. And I do still think they are top five at least, but probably top 3 for expected finish. Finishing result every single race. Ignore what's happening on the screen. Latest update to the F1 site means it just auto updates from time to time for no reason. Ignore that. I still think McLaren is close to essential, but there's at least a discussion to be had now, which there really wasn't before. Okay? So that's the McLaren stuff out of the way. Let's talk the drivers. I think Lando Norris is a massive differential and a very, very good pick if you can get him into your teams. The problem is the pricing. And the reason the problem with the pricing of Lando Norris is because of Max Verstappen. I think Max Verstappen is essential now. I think he's going to continue to win races this season. And if not, he's at least going to be on the podium. And isn't that the exact type of driver you always want to put the 2X on? Now, when he's affordable with 4A teams, mind you, I just don't see how you play without him. And for that is why I think the Lando Norris pick is difficult to fit in. Oscar Piastri seemed like the set and forget 2x for the rest of the season. Now he very much isn't. I still think he's a good pick, don't get me wrong, but you could definitely go without him, and depending on your budget, you might have to go without him in order to fit in Max Verstappen, which is kind of what I ended up doing, right? I think George Russell is going to continue to outperform the car. Sometimes he will pop up with those incredible results in Singapore that no one expects, but even when he did that, like 35 points, he got 30 points in Azerbaijan, he's going to continue to be just really solid, and he's not someone I'm rushing to sell in any capacity. You'll see some of the options later do include selling him, but I think he's fine to keep. Leclerc and Hamilton are very difficult to judge because they are cheaper than George Russell now. I think it's important to mention. I just don't know where to place the Ferrari. I really, really don't. I thought they would be bad. They were bad in the sprint qualifying. Managed to climb positions thanks to the crash further up the field, and then they looked good in the race. Matched the pace with the McLaren. I mean, McLaren was slightly faster. Norris was slightly faster than Leclerc, sure, but it was not by much. They beat Piastri, beat Russell. So I really don't know where to place them, but saying that they're not options anymore feels disingenuous, especially since they're actually looking likely to rise in price going forward. Here we get to three very, very interesting drivers that I want to talk about in sort of one little bunch. Even though there is 5 million between them. Antonelli, Albon, and Yuki Tsunoda. With 4A team structures like this, you can't afford them. What a lot of people are considering, and the reason why it's being discussed, is that when you start doing something like this and you suddenly free up 6 million, well, that frees up the funds for someone like this. I'm 2 million away from Kimi Antonelli here at 15.7. I still think one of these three is probably what you should have on your team if you're running a 3A, aka Max Verstappen, like on a lower budget. If you're at like 125 to 130 million and there's no way you're affording any 4A. But again, like if you're at 130 million, you can afford 4A without McLaren. So if 4A strategies open up for lower budget teams when you skip out on the McLaren constructor. But let's assume the McLaren is back in here. At 125 million, you're not affording 4A with McLaren in there, meaning that you have to go for someone else. And I think Kimi Antonelli, Alex Albon, and Yuki Tsunoda are all excellent picks for that. Yuki had a great weekend, but I also think like his super high score, 37 points, was very fortunate. I'm not expecting him to replicate that in Mexico. Mexico is a much more difficult track to overtake, and we have to remember that like COTA is a good track for overtakes. There was also the sprint and the amount of positions that he gained starting further back, qualifying poorly, and then climbing that after the carnage on the sprint. But also had a really good recovery in the main race. I don't think he's doing that again. I think Yuki Tsunoda, again, is fine with the Red Bull Racing constructor. It's not that sort of issue we saw earlier in the season around, the middle point of the season. And that's sort of why I ended up buying the Red Bull Racing constructor in Singapore. Obviously, it did not end up working out there, but that was my reasoning behind it. And this just proves it that Yuki Tsunoda can actually... It's not a liability for the Red Bull Racing constructor. I would still not, even though he is most likely to rise in budget this week because of that score, I would not rush out to buy Yuki Tsunoda this week, because Mexico feels like a track where Mexico is a track where you do have to qualify somewhat well, and he's just not doing that at the moment. If there are, in something like Brazil, maybe he's an option there as well. Good overtaking. If he performs badly in qualifying, can climb. The Red Bull car looks better, race pace wise, right? So maybe for Brazil, I would consider him. But even with him rising in price, I don't think I would consider him for Mexico. And then we move further down the field and start talking about all of these cheap assets, and it truly feels like any single one of them can just pop up with a monster haul at any point, and it feels very difficult to call. Nico Hulkenberg could have had a monster score this weekend had he not been involved in the incidents in the sprint. Liam Lawson with another 15-pointer out of seemingly nowhere. Gabriel Bortoleto with a massive 17-pointer out of nowhere. Let's not beat around the bush here. Sainz did DNF and he only got -3 points. So he would, if without the -20, he would have had a 25-pointer of a weekend. Again, that you can't just +20 to this because he would have scored points in the race probably, and probably done more overtakes. So you gotta see this is like a 20+ point swing, a 25-point swing. Sainz, even though for the last two, and on the budget builder side, it looks like it's a drop in price. There's no way you're selling Sainz in this sort of form. And I know people are going to do it, and I'm happy that you will do it, because I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not selling Sainz, because he would have had a monster haul this weekend as well. And, like, 8 points is a good score for him in Singapore, by the way. So people who are suggesting selling Sainz, I think they're completely incorrect, because we're late on in the season, budget don't matter that much. We need point scorers. And Sainz is just Alonso, but better at this point. He's really picked up his qualification in the last 5. He has really picked up his point scoring in the last 5, and this -3 pointer strengthens my faith that he's a good pick for the rest of the season. Not weakens it, because that sure, it was his mistake on the DNF, but DNFs happen and you can't really predict them. What you can predict is that this man got to Q3 in both the sprint quali and the main quali, and looked set for a points finish. So you cannot really ask for much more than that. And in terms of all of the options here, I think any one of them are viable and can pop up with a monster score, which is why it's so difficult to predict, apart from these two, right? But they do serve their purpose. I do think earlier in the season, when we had like Isaac Hadjar at 4.5 million, kind of crazy. And it sort of diluted the game, because like, why would you ever pick Colapinto at 4.5 when you have Isaac Hadjar or Liam Lawson at 4.5? Now I feel like the pricing after the majority of the season has gone by, I feel like we're finally at a point where the pricing sort of reflects the assets' potential, because we do have these 4.5 million assets, which you can slot in if you need to for budget reasons to afford the assets you want to afford, but you really cannot expect that much from them points-wise. This is what you should expect from these assets going forward. Are they fine to own? Yes, they can pop up with decent results, but if you can upgrade them to literally anyone above, I mean, Fernando Alonso is the cheapest after the Alpine guys now, which is crazy at 6.1. I think you should. With that said, I've not gone through every asset, but my general feeling of the assets and the general structure of teams, and let me first show you what I can do by selling McLaren this week, and then show you something else, right? And with every transfer that I propose now, what I truly have in mind is not the Mexican Grand Prix. Even though this is the Mexican Grand Prix team selection video, what I truly have in mind is my 3X chip, because that's what I have remaining. I have no other chips remaining. I only have the 3X. It's one of the most powerful chips in the game. And now, the people around me and above me that I'm chasing for rank, I think somewhere in the region of 35 to 40% of people have used theirs. That's a lot of people that I can now catch by playing mine correctly. I have 2 free transfers, and coming up, we have a sprint weekend in Brazil, where if it rains, I might not want to use the 3X there. We then have Vegas, which is a very different track, where I'm expecting McLaren to be good. We then have Qatar, where I think I'm probably using the 3X, and I'm expecting McLaren to be good there. I'm going to want the options to make the transfers I want to make in the next 3 races after this. I have been overhauling my team or changing the structure of my team quite drastically over the last couple of races, and I think I need to hit the brakes. It feels crazy to say that in a week where there are more opportunities available than ever before, but frankly, looking at my team, I'm pretty happy with it. I have Max Verstappen. I have 3 decent, midfield drivers. Alonso and Sainz can definitely end up in the points. Bortoleto can qualify last and climb in position, and he's also, very likely to rise in price, even if I don't. And I know I just said that doesn't matter, but it matters a little bit. Okay, it matters a little bit. At least I'm at least without the Alpines. I have the McLaren constructor. I have Mercedes now, which is fine. And I can just kind of sit on this, right? I have been looking at transfers to make, and all of these sideways moves of like an Alonso to a Hadjar or, whatever, right? Alonso to, I know a lot of people are discussing Oliver Behrman for this week. I could make those, but they all are just that. They're just sideways moves, one transfer to ensure that I save a transfer. There is another option, which is the more radical one, which I don't think I will do, but it's something to ponder. And that is this. I can afford in free transfers to run Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, the 2 probably most informed drivers right now. I wouldn't, maybe Norris is the most, Sainz is probably arguably more informed than Norris is, but the drivers I'm expecting to finish P1, P2. With Red Bull Racing, Mercedes, I get the max points twice. This could definitely outscore the other one. The problem then, if I make this move, is that then I only have 2 free transfers in Brazil. And I get sort of locked with my cheap assets here. I can't change them too much because I only have 0.4 in the bank. What if I want someone like... Granted, I don't think I'm going to be able to get up to a Yuki Tsunoda anyway, so I think those 3 drivers that I talked about earlier, Yuki Tsunoda, Antonelli, and Albon, I think those 3 are sort of just non-options for my team, because I'm not going to move out of the 4A to a 4 to fit one of them in. This looks strong. But again, it leaves me very in a very rigid position where I can't get out of it easily without potentially taking a hit. Obviously I can just move back to something, but maybe I'm fine with this. And frankly, if I'm using the 3X right now or obviously not in Mexico, but in Brazil or in Qatar, these are probably the 2 drivers I would want to put them on. And the way to get Max Verstappen and Norris for my team right now is this. Red Bull Racing, Mercedes, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris. That is how I get these 2 in, and these are the 2 drivers that I would want to put the 3X and the 2X on with that chip. So maybe I do that now, if it looks good, and then, if I need McLaren back, I can just get McLaren back. And getting McLaren back is quite easy. I just do this, and if I've saved a transfer somewhere, I could maybe get Piastri with one of the Alpine boys here, something like this. The question is like, is Norris worth that much more, or is Oscar just gonna find form again? Because I was super content to put the 3X on this pairing this week. Should Oscar's performance of this week diminish him that much that I want Lando Norris that badly? I don't know. Looking at the team, any other move is very unlikely. Right? I think me switching between Red Bull Racing and Mercedes back and forth like I've been doing is not going to get me anywhere at this stage. I've been unlucky that I've had them in the wrong order of when they hold. But I do think they will score similarly going forward. So I don't see a reason to upgrade Mercedes to Red Bull Racing. Ferrari I haven't seen enough from. If they perform really well in Mexico as well, then I might need to consider what to do to get them in for Brazil. That's also one of the reasons, by the way, why I really, really, really want 3 free transfers available in Brazil. Because what if Ferrari look really good in Mexico again, and I'm stuck trying to get my perfect 3x teammate, and I just have to ignore Ferrari. I think for me this week, if I don't go for the Max Verstappen, Norris, Red Bull Racing, Mercedes build, the likely transfer for me is just one sideways transfer to someone in the midfield. Either someone in the midfield that looks good in practice, or it could be, say we watch practice and Ferrari look really, really good and Mercedes look really, really bad, which is definitely possible. And I feel like Russell is quite honest when he talks about the car after practice. He said this week that he was not expecting them to be close to Max Verstappen and the McLarens, and he really wasn't even close to the Ferraris either. So I think I'll listen to what Russell says, and if Ferrari look good, my sideways move could just be this, right? So I have options here in which sideways move I make. As for my cheap drivers, Sainz is the most likely to drop in price, but I'm not selling Sainz for the reasons I discussed earlier. Bortoleto is the best price riser of the three, but the one that I'm least confident in, actually getting a good result. And then Fernando Alonso is middle of the road in both. Actually, even with that minus 16, looks fine for a price increase and just keeps qualifying relatively well and is probably, a P8 to P10 candidate and has been, for the entirety of the season. So I'm not so sure I need to sell him anyway. So all of them have their upsides. And downsides, I suppose. The driver I'm least confident in is actually Gabriel Bortoleto. So even though he's most likely to rise in price, he might be the transfer out. Who might be the transfer in then? Well, Oliver Bearman is one I've discussed. And a lot of people are discussing because he's just in a really good spell of form at the moment. And looking at his points, like this is really, really good. Obviously the DNF here, but ignoring the DNF, his average scores across this second half of the season has been really, really, really excellent. So he is definitely someone who I'm expecting a 7-pointer from. Liam Lawson, Isaac Hadjar, I'm also expecting to, generally outperform Gabriel Bortoleto. It's just whether I want to sell Gabriel Bortoleto because he is not an asset that is a must sell by any means, and he looks likely to rise in price after his great weekend that he just had now. I don't know what I'm doing with my team. If you have any suggestions or if you see a clear line that I've missed, please let me know down below in the comments, or join me either on Twitch later tonight or on Friday, or for the deadline, the pre-deadline stream on Saturday, and tell me what I've missed. But right now, I think it's either Russell, Alonso, Bortoleto, or Sainz, depending on what we see in practice, that will be transferred out for a sideways move to save a transfer and be ready for Brazil, Vegas, and Qatar. Because those three feel like the 3 weekends that are going to matter the most after Abu Dhabi. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know it was a long one, but there was a lot of things to discuss. Have I missed anything? Do you have any questions? Please leave them down below in the comments. Thank you so much for your support. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you made it this far. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.